Hello and welcome to the Zoomer Hall concert series. I'm Kathleen Kajioka. As always at Zoomer Hall, we are a 4-in-1 operation. We have a live concert, a live radio broadcast to the New Classical FM network. We're live on the web. You can watch this at classicalfm.ca, and it's a taping of a future episode of the concert series airing on Vision TV. Now today, we head back into the realm of the string quartet. Last week, we heard the Afiara String Quartet bring us the dynamic sounds of the current edge of the genre. Well, today, we head back to the beginning. The Eybler Quartet specializes in the first 100 years of string quartet writing. They play on historical instruments and in the historically informed style. And of course, the repertoire includes that of the father of the string quartet, Franz Joseph Haydn, but they're also dedicated to resurrecting lesser-known works from the period, some of which we're going to hear today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Eybler String Quartet. Johann Baptist van Hal, the string quartet, Opus 6, number 3 in C, and we're live at Zoomer Hall with the Eybler Quartet, and we'll be talking string quartets, historical performance, and more when we come back.
Okay. How do your instruments and bows differ from modern instruments?
Wham! Well, we hit them often. No, the instruments themselves, the bodies of the violins and the cello and the viola are quite similar. The box part is the same, roughly speaking. I mean, there's some inside bits that might have been made to be a little bit lighter for an instrument from the late 18th century. The bigger differences are in the strings, which are made out of gut. And then either overspun with metal or just plain gut. And the bows are different. They're generally speaking lighter than a modern bow. They don't have the same mass. By the end of the 18th century, a lot of bows would, to possibly the untrained eye, look pretty much like a modern bow, but they're not quite as heavy. Necessarily. I mean, there's a great deal of variation. The whole idea of there being a standardized violin or a standardized violin bow is very much a product of the 19th century. So you can find all kinds of things in the end of the 18th century. The three of us playing instruments that we hold up on our shoulders don't use chin rests. That was really not common until the early part of the 19th century. And what else can I say? The angle of the neck is slightly different on some of the instruments. Again, there's no standard. You can find instruments from the middle of the 18th century to the end of the 18th century with a variety. If the neck is bent more back, the string break is more. There's a bit more pressure on the bridge actually. But anyway, so I think those are the big differences in terms of the instruments. Oh, and Margaret. The cellist uses no end pin, so she's holding the cello up between her calves. And in fact, the end pin was not a standard feature of the cello until the second half of the 19th century, by 1870 or so. Is that an adequate answer? Okay.
Okay, so just hold on one sec. Just don't start until I tell you. Sean, you got him? Yeah. Go ahead.
Could you each describe the manufacture of your instrument and what year or more or less years it was built?
Okay,
each of
yeah.
you?
Since I'm holding the microphone, I'll start. My viola was made in 1725 in Vienna, so it is a spectacularly adequate instrument for this music. It probably was being used in Vienna at the time that the piece that we just played first saw the light of day. So yeah, Aislinn?
My violin was made in 1746 in Spain, in Barcelona. It's very unusual. At that time in Spain, the big hot ticket was guitars, in fact. So the maker that made this instrument, there are only a few examples of his work still exist today.
And my cello was made sometime in the 1730s, so also about the same age, and maybe a few years older than the composers we're playing today. It's made by an Italian who lived in Paris by the name of Andrea Castignari.
I have the modern instrument here. Mine is Italian. It was made in Milano in 1860.
Sing and dance, please. Pardon me? Oh, hold on. We're gonna just wait.
What type of wood is in each of those instruments?
The wood. The top of the instrument, or you can probably see it on hers better than mine, but that is made out of spruce. The back and the ribs are typically made out of maple, as is the neck and the scroll. The tailpiece, the so-called tailpiece, this little thing at the bottom that holds the strings on, can be made out of any sort of durable, heavy wood. You sometimes see boxwood. Ours are, I think today, there's one rosewood and 3 ebony. The fingerboards are made out of ebony, or in my case, it's made out of willow with an ebony sort of fitting. There's some bits on the inside also that make it easier to glue together. And that's made of willow. And the bridge is made out of maple as well. So we need to tune.
Yeah, this is your perfect time. Just a reminder, we do have an 8-minute interview first, and you are in your seat. 30 seconds. And just avoid moving it right up the top. 20 seconds, stand by. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, in 5, big applause, big applause. Welcome back to Zoomer Hall. I'm Kathleen Kajioka, and today we're here with the Eybler Quartet, which is made up of violinists Aislinn Noski and Julia Wedman, violist Pat Jordan, and cellist Margaret Gay. So we just heard a piece by Von Hall. Can you tell us, Pat, who is this guy?
Who is this guy, Von Hall? This guy, Von Hall, is a rough contemporary of Haydn's. He was born in 1739 and died in 1813. He was Bohemian and grew up in a fairly rural setting, but by the time he was 6 or 7, had shown some promise on the violin and the organ and got some training, and eventually was played the organ in the church in his town, and there was enough interest in him that the local noble took an interest in his case and got him more training. He moved to Vienna to sort of be dipped in those waters, right? So that he would learn the style, and that he had two patrons, the Schafgotsch family and the Riesch family, and the Baron Riesch thought highly enough of him that he paid for a trip for von Hall to travel to Italy in the 1760s. And he went there and had a bang-up time, worked with Willibald Christoph Gluck in Vienna, and with a fellow named Florian Gassmann, who was in Rome at the time. Gassmann ended up being the sort of big wig in Vienna in the 1770s and 80s, and learned what we call today the Galant style, this sort of the first chapter of the classical style as we have come to know it. He wrote a couple of operas, or helped with a couple of operas there. And then moved back to Vienna on the understanding, at least it was the Baron Riesch's understanding, that he would work in his court. Well, that didn't ever actually work out. And we don't know quite what happened with von Hall. There are reports that he entered a Great Depression or that he spent a period being insane. I suspect that was slightly overblown, and basically he just didn't want to go work for the guy. He liked Vienna, and he liked being in Rome, and he liked being in Florence, and he ended up staying there and had introductions and taught a lot of the higher nobilities children to play the piano and how to compose music and how to sing and all sorts of things. He was Mozart tends to get credit for being the first freelance composer in the West, but von Hall beat him by a few years. He wrote a huge number of symphonies and string quartets and music very much like we've just heard. Ceased doing that sort of composition in the early 1780s and focused more on keyboard chamber music, sonatas, and on teaching. And he made quite a handsome living. He never married, and lived the rest of his life in Vienna.
So how did you come upon his string quartets?
Oh, I guess it's one of those names, if you start to read anything in a little bit of depth about Mozart or Haydn, it's a name you bump into at some point. And you can either say, oh, Rembrandt, or you can say, von Hall, who was he? And then go look him up and see what's going on. So I would say that it is shrouded in the mists of my misspent youth reading about Mozart and Haydn, and then he and actually the composer Eybler, after whom we're named, were two keepers, and subsequently we've developed a fairly big barn of.
What is it about von Hall's music that you find so worth resurrecting?
The audience may not share this view. I think it is unspeakably charming. I think that it captures a taste of that time that, frankly, you sometimes miss with Mozart or Haydn, because they're Mozart and Haydn, the better-known composers of the time, because they're so creative, right? It's sort of like if the only pop music you ever heard was the Beatles, you wouldn't know what the rest of pop music sounded like in the 60s and into the 70s, right? So I think that in a way, you can argue very conclusively and convincingly that it's simpler music, but what it expresses is, to our mind, without peer.
Well, there was nothing I found wanting in terms of entertainment and quality, activity, development, all of that. Certainly very lively music.
As so many composers of the 18th century do, he suffers from being an excellent composer instead of a genius, right? or something like that. And so, there's nothing wanting. The balance of it's sort of the two of the movements are almost to a moment, textbook examples of sort of rudimentary sonata form. I mean, it's all there. The proportions are great. There's nothing. And the invention, what people called in the 18th century, the invention, the capacity to write a nice melody, he's got in spades, so it's...
And we're going to hear some Haydn, and of course, he's like the big dude of the string quartet in the era. Talk a bit about him and what we're going to hear, in contrast to what we just heard from Von Hall.
Right, okay, so in contrast, the Von Hall that we heard was composed in 1772, and really aimed at, most chamber music in the 18th century was aimed at an amateur audience, for people to buy, there's no CDs, there's no radio, there's no nothing. You want music, you make it happen, right? So you go to the shop and you buy the latest quartets by Von Hall and you go home and you read them, and that's the music that you have in your life. The same thing's true with Haydn. This is from Opus 33, which by Haydn's own description are composed in a new and special way. And people have kind of poo-pooed that, but I think it's true, actually. I don't think it was just a marketing ploy to get people to buy them. I think it was really the case. The form is a great deal more developed, and the imitativeness in the writing, the scale of it is considerably bigger. I think we play a couple of movements and then have another break. So it's the piece itself is almost twice as long as the Von Hall.
Okay, so we're going to hear a couple of movements now. Once again, the Eybler Quartet. This is a couple of movements from Haydn String Quartet, Opus 33, number 5. More dramatic side of Haydn. That was two movements from his string quartet, Opus 33, number 5, nicknamed the How Do You Do? And we are live at Zimmer Hall with the Eybler Quartet. We're going to have another chat and hear some more Haydn when we come back.
Okay, so we've got another 5-minute break. You guys can anybody have any more questions?
I have two. You'll see if you need the second one. I'll wait.
Okay, sorry. Okay, just hang on and
Yep.
I'll tell you. Go ahead.
You guys obviously enjoy playing the instruments you have in front of you now. I wouldn't be surprised if you have 100 other ones at home in a collection. But would you consider purchasing or playing a newly made instrument, is there any comparison for you guys? You're obviously very specialized, very knowledgeable about this stuff.
I wouldn't say I have a collection at home, but yeah, well, musicians get paid. You don't make collections. Other people make collections, and we get to use the nice instruments sometimes. No, I have two. I have another viola at home, which was made in 1990, which is a phenomenal, beautiful, wonderful instrument that I met while I was playing in another string quartet. We were playing on a matched set of instruments, and I felt like I picked that instrument up and it already knew the notes. Right? It was a and I love playing that viola. I mean, this one's appropriate for what we're doing today, but when when I have an opportunity to play that one, I do. I also have what's called a viola d'amore, which is another instrument. It has 12 strings on it, but 6 of them you play on, and 6 of them vibrate in sympathy. But that one was also made in the last 15 years. So instrument making is as healthy now as it has been at any moment in the history of the West. And not just the West, because there are a lot of fine instruments coming out of places like China and Korea as well. So no, I mean, it's first of all, I mean, part of it's a cost issue, right? Not everybody can afford an antique, because that's what you're buying, right? I mean, it's like, oh, it's a wonderful instrument. Yeah, that's all those things, but it also has a value that is an antique value rather than a use value. So, and yeah, Julie.
I just want to add that I think you'll find often that the bows that we use are modern bows, just because bows tend to not be able to last as long as instruments. They're more fragile, they break more easily. So many of the historical bows you'll find in museums and owned by collectors, and many players play modern bows. This one I'm playing today is an original bow, but the other bow that I use for Baroque playing, for example, was made by a friend of mine just a few years ago. So,
thank you very much. Do I have time for question number 2? Oh, we got time for lots of questions, aren't there? Obviously, you guys say that until you hear that. Obviously, you're playing music written for, I assume at least some of these are written for a string quartet. How much, I lost the word, the lenience do you have as far as the arrangement? Are you allowed to, or do you want to meddle with that at all? And
yeah, this is the string quartet is it's a very interesting time period in music, because we're moving from what we call the performer-composer time period. So in the Baroque era, the composers would write a certain amount of text down. So they would write the notes you're supposed to play. Once in a while, they would write a direction, like a dynamic marking, like volume marking, or a character marking, a tempo marking, and not always. It was really up to the musician, to the performer, to make up all these things. In the classical period, we're going from that tradition to Beethoven, who is very picky with what he writes down. So all of a sudden, we feel constrained in a way, because there's so many details in Beethoven's quartets. So I would say the music of Haydn, while more detailed than the Von Hall that we played, is not nearly as detailed in the composer markings. So we still have a little bit of creative freedom. Yeah.
2.5 minutes to air. One more question. Nice. Kevin's got it. Okay, just hold on one sec. Yeah. Go ahead.
What are the strings made of?
What are our strings made of?
Yeah.
They're a mix of plain catgut, like what we used to, string tennis rackets with and make snowshoes out of and all that, and strings that are gut in their inside that are then wrapped with metal. And wrapping them with metal just makes them denser so that the diameter of the string doesn't have to be so big. You can use all gut strings, and people probably did until about 1660.
Bows.
The bows, they're made out of, some of ours are made out of Pernambuco wood, and some of them are made out of ironwood. There's a fairly wide range of materials for bows. And then the white bit is the tail of a horse that's been bleached white. Usually bleached white. Sometimes they leave it black. But
Thank you.
Yep.
90 seconds to air, 90 seconds. Just remember, if she asks you a question, just try to hold it up here and not down here just because there's interference. I'm pretty sure. It's, you want to put it here? We're first going to do questions. We're first doing it, right? Yeah. So if 1 minute to air, 1 minute.
Oh, another busy second violin part.
Seconds to air. 20 seconds. Stand by, Kathleen. In 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 8, 5. Big applause,
Welcome back to Zoomer Hall. I'm Kathleen Kajioka, and we are live with the Eybler Quartet, which has just treated us to some very lovely Haydn. Now, Margaret, you guys are in a bit of an unusual seating because normally string quartets have two violins together on the left and then, some combination of viola and cello on the right. But you've got Pat next to you on on your right. Is that because you want to sit next to your husband?
No, not really. No, it's nice with a lot of this music to have the violins across from each other because they often are playing back and forth with the melody, one voice, second voice, and so it's nice to visually have the back and forth. So that's where we started, and then why do I sit here and not there? That's right. So the viola F holes are pointing out toward the audience. So he sits there.
All right.
And I have the more flexibility with that.
That's a good point. It's good. It's always good to be pro viola. No bias whatsoever. I also have a question about the instruments. Okay, so you guys make a point of playing on period instruments. What is different about them that affects the result musically?
So as Pat was saying, the body of the instrument is pretty much the same. So the little bits and pieces. So for instance, looking at Julie's violin, the tail piece on the bottom and the gut that is used right where her fingers are, as opposed to metal, that's different. Then moving up the violin, you'll see the bridge will be different on a modern violin. And they're very similar shapes, but they are different. Inside the violin, there's a sound post and a bass bar, and both of those would be different.
What does all that do to the sound?
So what's happened is that as we've moved into bigger concert halls, and composers are composing bigger pieces for bigger spaces, people want to make more sound. And so what we've done gradually over the years is made adjustments to these instruments so they can be louder. And that's why we have made these adjustments. So we're going back and trying to play in small spaces like this.
What's the advantage of going back? I mean, isn't louder better, Margaret?
No. Well, loud is good, but I think for this kind of music, which is ideally very detail-oriented, it's nice for audiences to be able to hear the detail. It's nice for us to be able to hear the detail. So therefore, one needs to be in small, intimate spaces. And if one's going to be in a small, intimate space, one might as well try and play this music. One might as well try to create the sound that these composers would have been hearing.
I mean, it's a bit of a different color palette too. It's not just a question of volume.
Yeah, got just a slightly warmer, darker sound, I think, perhaps, to the steel strings.
Maybe I'll ask Aisling now actually about the bow, because that's a really significant thing. What about the bow affects the result for you in this music?
Yeah, the bow, a classical bow, or sometimes they're called transitional bows, as in transition between Baroque and modern bow. The earlier bows are lighter in general. That's always the case. And I find that the difference in bows is sort of like a difference in between paintbrushes. You know, if you really want to, you can paint a giant wall with a tiny filigree brush. You can do it. It'll take you a month and it might be a bad choice for you. But you really want a roller brush to put a big old coat of paint on a huge wall. So for me, a modern bow is more like a roller brush. I'm going to paint a big, loud palette of constant sound, and a lighter, more flexible bow gives me more filigree options in my sound and my phrasing.
So presumably, you've played this music on modern bow. So what's the difference for you in terms of
Well, it's
how it
absolutely
feels?
possible to play this music on any kind of instrument if one really puts their mind to it. It's a matter of training and practice. But I find that I can put much less effort in when using equipment that's more closer to the period that the composer's writing from.
Any particular techniques that have an advantage with this bow?
Well, I can play a lot faster on a lighter bow because I think that comes from the fact that it weighs less and I can move it through the air faster. I can throw a smaller object further faster than a heavier one.
Right.
It's so that the lightness, the fleetness, and it is much harder on this particular bow to sustain a long note. And so if I'm asked by a composer like Haydn to sustain a long note, I have to really work on it to do it on this bow, which gives it a different color and I think a different feeling to the audience.
Right, interesting. Yeah, so the physical and the musical intertwine. Let's go back to Pat. So you guys are all really busy. I mean, the three upper strings are all members of Tafel Music, which is a very busy ensemble, and Margaret is pretty much the busiest freelance cellist I know. How do you guys get the time to get together and put together your projects?
By hook and by crook, really, yeah. No, Margaret is very busy. I often introduce myself as Mr. Margaret Gay. Because everybody knows Margaret. Oh, you're married to her, really? Oh, you're the viola player, right? Yeah. It requires a huge amount of planning, actually, and carving out little bits of time. We will often, for example, have a period where we're just rehearsing. In anticipation of projects that are coming up, we may have, some concert, and we only have 3 days together before that. Well, 3 days does not. From our perspective, a successful quartet concert make. And so then we have to carve out days here and there. Sometimes we call it pre-rehearsing instead of rehearsing, I think it's a project that's very important to all of us, and so we make that time. But it's a challenge. It's a serious challenge. People would like us to come and play for them, and I very often tell them no, because I just know that there's a big red mark through February 2016. Not specifically, but there'll be some period in the future that I just know we can't swing anything, and that's disappointing. But maybe it makes us slightly more alluring in some other way. I don't know.
Now, I'm curious about your name. You mentioned earlier this composer that you've named yourselves after. Tell us a bit about him.
Okay. Joseph Leopold Eybler von Eybler was born in Vienna. In fact, the little village of Schwechat, which is where if you fly to Vienna now, you will land on the place where his house used to be. He's one of the first of the Viennese composers to actually be Viennese. He was born in 1764, pardon me, and came to the attention of Haydn and Mozart both. Mozart hired him to be the rehearsal pianist for the world premiere of Così fan tutte. And as a result of that experience, Eybler swore never to involve himself in the opera again because of all the backbiting and people sleeping with each other.
Even
all
back
crazy.
then.
So, yeah, even better back then. He eventually. I mentioned Florian Gassmann before, who was the Hofkapellmeister to the emperor. Eybler eventually got that job. He succeeded Salieri, who died in 1802 or 1803, and he became the next Hofkapellmeister. So he was an extraordinarily influential guy who nobody in this room has probably heard of.
Until today.
Until today. That's right. He was also close enough to Mozart that Mozart's Requiem remained unfinished at his death, and it was a commission that needed to be completed, and and Constanza, his wife, approached Eybler first to complete it. And in fact, the Tafel music recording is mostly Eybler's completion of the Requiem.
Okay. Well, we're going to hear some more from you now. The Eybler Quartet, but not music by Eybler this time. Once again, we're going to hear from Haydn, the last two movements of his string quartet, Opus 33, number 5. The Scherzo and Finale from Haydn's String Quartet, Opus 33, number 5, live at Zoomer Hall with the Eybler Quartet, 4 of Toronto's busiest early music specialists who nonetheless find time to dedicate to this genre about which they are so passionate. Thank you so much for finding time to share that passion with us today. Well, that's it for us at Zoomer Hall. I'm Kathleen Kajioka. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.